so much for joining us this evening for the first Public Information Center for the plan phase of the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District project. The purpose of the meeting this evening is to share information about the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District plan research and process, and to give participants the opportunity to share your thoughts on the policy direction of the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District plan. The Heritage Conservation District plan phase is the second phase of work for the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District project. This work is being undertaken by the City of Cambridge with the assistance of ASI Heritage in collaboration with Photon Planning and Design. My name is Abraham Plunkett-Latimer, and I am the City of Cambridge's project manager for this project. We also have joining us this evening Councillors Donna Reed and Shannon Adshade. I have lost track. If there are any other councillors, let me just check my list here. I don't think so. We are also being joined by city staff, including Joan, I think it's Yelena, the policy, a manager of policy planning. We are also joined by Laura Waldy, senior heritage planner, administrative service representative, Karen Stieg-Drobig, business systems analysts, Greg Algie and Helly Shaw. And we are also facilitating the discussion this evening. We also have a number of members of the consulting team, including Rebecca Sciarra, who is the project manager for the consultants, Christina Martins, Laura Wickett from ASI Heritage, Ute Maya Giambattista, and Nathan Petrosyan from Photon Planning. I'd like to introduce Ute to introduce the structure for this evening now.
Thanks so much, Abe. So today's agenda will be very much informed by an update on the study phase, as well as the work done to date on the plan phase. We will then I will introduce you after the presentation. We will go through a question and answer period, a brief period in which we can address the main questions you may have as far as it relates to the overall study process and timelines. We will then be taking a 5-minute break, come back for a series of breakout rooms. I will explain in more detail what that entails when we get to that portion. Once we finish with the breakout rooms, we will come back to this plenary to kind of present in a couple of points, the main salient points that were discussed in your specific group. And then we will close the meeting, hopefully by 8:30. We don't want to keep you late, with a recap and next steps. So with that, before we get into any further delay, I also wanted to remind you of the basics of WebEx or Zoom or any other platform I'm sure many of you are already used to. But anyway, if you need to speak or you want to ask a question, please raise your hand in the bottom tab. You will see a little smiley face that says reactions. You can click on that, and a new window comes up where you can see raise your hand. So you can click on that, your hand will be raised. If you want to lower your hand, you can also click back on that and you will lower it. You can also applaud or put any other emojis if so you feel inclined. Anyway, so before we get into the actual presentation component, we wanted to run a quick poll that Greg will help us put online. So we'll let you post that, Greg.
Are you running that or? Okay, thanks.
How many answers you got, May?
We're waiting on about a third at this point.
If everyone sees a list of A through J on their screen, we're just putting this poll out to everyone here so we can understand who's with us tonight. So if you're able to select an answer, and some people have more than one selection for sure, or more than one hat they're wearing here tonight, it's great because we don't get to have those formal conversations we have if in person.
Thank you. So we can see that a good percentage of you in attendance are homeowners, at 27%. Other representatives at 27%. You can answer at 27%. Landowners 11%. Interested citizen at 14%. So it gives us a good understanding of who's attending today. Thank you. Thank you for completing the poll. So with that, I will pass it back to Abe to start the presentation. Thank you, Abe.
Thank you, Ute. So if you'll just bear with me while I share my screen here. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. This is going to be just a quick presentation. And at this point, it'll be a quick presentation that will really be addressing the context for the Heritage Conservation District Plan and its relationship to other initiatives that are currently being undertaken by the City of Cambridge. It's intended to address why a Heritage Conservation District Plan is being considered for Galt Core right now and what it may be able to achieve. I'm not going to go over a detailed process questions about the plan because that will be covered by Rebecca Chiara in her presentation immediately after mine. So that's just a brief rundown of what we're going to cover. So to make sure that we all understand the area that's under discussion, here's a map of the recommended boundary for a Galt Core Heritage Conservation District. It includes much of the downtown core, along with the east side of the Grand River and the areas immediately north and south of Main Street, east to Wellington Street. If a Heritage Conservation District is designated for Galt Core, the area would be regulated by a Heritage Conservation District Plan. The Galt Core area is expected to experience very significant growth and investment over the next decade. Much of the downtown core is located within an urban growth center. Urban growth centers are areas defined in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, for which defined within that plan, for which the province has set minimum density targets. The intention behind the growth plan is to build up and strengthen already existing urban centers with increased density and with access to transit. The growth plan's targets are measured as people and jobs per hectare. The target that has been set for downtown Galt, the downtown Galt Urban Growth Center, is 150 people and jobs per hectare by 2031. For the City of Cambridge to meet this target, we will need to add approximately 3,000 people and jobs to the area over the next decade. Development in downtown Galt will also be impacted by proposed investments in higher order transit. The stage 2 Ion light rail is proposed to connect Cambridge to Kitchener-Waterloo. And there are proposed to be platforms on Wellington Street, just north of Main, and on Bruce Street between Water Street and Ainslie. The locations of these stations would place a large portion of the downtown core within major transit station areas that were endorsed by Waterloo Regional Council in the spring of 2021. So that the dots on your map indicate the proposed locations for transit stations. And I'm giving this just to give some context for the policy context that we're operating within. The downtown core is also characterized by a large concentration of significant heritage resources, such as buildings, which date from the 19th century and early 20th centuries. And this area is unique within the city of Cambridge. We need to determine how to encourage growth that conserves and enhances these resources, which are valued by the community and contribute to downtown Galt's distinct identity. In this context of expected significant growth and investment in downtown Galt, the key question is, how can these resources be conserved and how can they evolve over time? The purpose of a Heritage Conservation District Plan it's being considered as a tool at this point for the conservation of important assets in Galt Core. The plan would proactively identify what assets there are, identify what makes them significant, and provide policies for how best to conserve them as Galt grows and changes. This process will be covered in more detail in Rebecca's presentation, so I won't get into detail here. But what I would like to highlight, however, is how this project fits into the bigger picture. A Heritage Conservation District Plan is being considered as a key part of a larger harmonized planning framework that is intended to answer questions about how and where growth can best be accommodated and set expectations for development of the downtown core over the coming decades. This planning framework is currently being developed through a number of related studies that are being undertaken at the same time and informing one another. These include the Galt Heights study, the Galt Core Hcd project, or Heritage Conservation District project, the Growth and Intensification study, the Citywide Zoning Bylaw review, and the Galt Visualization study. At the end of this process, the area would be regulated by a Galt Core secondary plan, which would outline a vision and specific development policies to guide growth, an updated zoning bylaw, and a Heritage Conservation District plan that would provide detailed policies regarding heritage conservation. The intent is that each of these documents would be informed by one another and work together to create a cohesive vision for Galt Core. At this point in the process, to create the harmonized planning framework, there are a number of key intersections, particularly between the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District project and the Galt Heights study, which is also currently underway. The purpose of the Galt Heights study is to evaluate the Galt Core area and determine what building heights may be appropriate in which locations in order to accommodate the required growth. The result will be guidelines that will help inform the Galt Core secondary plan. The study intersects with the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District plan in that both will address what kind of relationship should exist between existing heritage resources and new buildings. Because of these intersections, the city is planning on undertaking joint consultation regarding the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District plan and the Galt Heights study. Draft height guidelines have now been prepared and are available on the City of Cambridge's website. The city is intending to hold public consultation regarding these draft guidelines at roughly the same time as the second and third public meetings for the Galt Core Heritage Conservation District project. The intent is that the draft policies for the HCD plan and draft policies for the height guidelines will be informed by public input and by one another to ensure that conservation and intensification goals are met appropriately. These draft policies will then inform the ongoing work of the growth and intensification study to help prepare a secondary plan for the Galt Core area. So just to summarize these key points, Galt Corps is expecting significant growth, and that's the context in which contemplation of a heritage conservation district plan is being considered. Galt Corps also contains significant cultural heritage resources. A HCD plan is being considered as part of a larger harmonized planning framework that will be intended to guide growth while conserving what's important. And we are currently conducting our consultation alongside the Heights study so that the Heights study and the Heritage Conservation District project are able to inform one another as they continue to be developed and through public input. If there are any questions or comments following the meeting, I'm very happy to meet with you individually. Feel free to contact me at any point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abe. So we'll pass the baton now to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Uta. Let's go and get my sharing right. Okay. Everyone can see my screen. Excellent. Thank you, Abe, and thank you, everyone, for making it tonight and taking the time to join us as we kick off the next phase towards establishing a heritage conservation district in Galt Corps. I'm Rebecca Shera, project manager on the consultant team, and I've been involved with the project since early 2021. Tonight, we've got 3 key goals for our time together. First, we'd like to recap on the findings of the Heritage Conservation District study phase that was completed in 2021. Second, we would like to share with you the steps and process involved in creating an HCD plan. And finally, we would like to hear from you. We want to share the proposed draft objectives for the HCD plan in Galt Corps and hear any feedback, take any general questions from the room. And then, as Uta identified, we will then move into smaller group discussions to hear from you about the qualities and characteristics you value in downtown Galt and in the area that we are looking at for a Heritage Conservation District. We would like to understand how you see new development fitting in the Heritage Conservation District and how best we should conserve the area in a context of change. I want to first do a refresh on how we have gotten to the stage of creating an HCD plan in Galt Corps. Downtown Galt and its many heritage resources have been studied since the early 1980s. In late 2020, the City of Cambridge issued a formal request for proposal to begin the first step towards establishing an HCD, which begins with the study phase. The HCD study phase for Galt Corps kicked off in January 2021 and included historical research, analysis, property survey, and various public, property owner, and stakeholder consultation sessions. The results of that work concluded that a portion of the downtown area retains cultural heritage value and recommended that the city proceed towards developing an HCD plan for this area. The study phase concluded that a portion of the downtown core contains a rich collection of interconnected heritage features and fabric. Various buildings, the Grand River, the area's dramatic topography, scenic views, and streetscapes are some of the key features that are important to manage into the future in the downtown. They express themes and qualities important in the history and contemporary experience of downtown Cambridge. These conclusions were informed by a robust consultation program that included 2 public information centers, an online survey, dedicated property owner workshops, 2 community update sessions, a project website, and mailouts to all property owners in the area under assessment, and 2 council meetings. At the end of the study phase, the work completed resulted in City Council coming to a decision in October 2021 to proceed with the next step in the process and to begin developing an HCD plan for downtown Cambridge, as shown here. So what is an HCD plan in greater detail? An HCD plan is the primary tool for implementing conservation in a heritage conservation district and managing change within the boundary. A plan is required to be prepared under the Ontario Heritage Act and needs to include the following items. 1. Objectives of the district. Second, an explanation of why the place is important. Thirdly, a description of the specific features and properties that are important and should be conserved. And then policy statements, guidelines, and procedures for achieving the district's objectives. And then finally, a description of the types of changes that will not require permits, as well as those types of changes that will require permits. The Ontario Heritage Act also sets out minimum consultation activities required while developing an HCD plan. Those include at least one public meeting held to discuss the proposed HCD plan, public posting of information relating to the district, making sure that a copy of the plan is made available to the public prior to its adoption, and thirdly, consultation with the city's Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee regarding the proposed HCD plan. In terms of overall process during the HCD plan stage, the following key steps occur. The plan, including policies, guidelines, and permitting processes, are developed. Consultation is held with the public throughout that process to inform development of those policies and guidelines. The plan is made available to the public. The local Heritage Advisory Committee is consulted. The plan and results of consultation are presented to Council to make a decision about whether to proceed and to protect the area under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. If Council does not agree to proceed, the plan is shelved and no bylaw is enacted. If Council agrees that the process should continue, a notice of bylaw would be sent to all property owners within the area to be designated as the Heritage Conservation District. And finally, property owners have an opportunity as part of this process to object to the designation. And if that occurs, the matter would be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And that hearing can result in changes to the bylaw or plan before it goes into force, or alternatively, may result in the municipality deciding not to proceed further in the process. In terms of timing for the Galt Core HCD plan phase, the schedule is split into 3 steps. The first phase is occurring now and includes reviewing all the properties in the boundary to identify contributing versus non-contributing properties, developing the district's objectives, and holding our first public information center, which is tonight. The second phase involves developing the policies and guidelines and permitting processes. This will occur through the late winter and spring and will involve a community workshop, an online survey, and meeting with the local Heritage Advisory Committee. The third phase involves drafting the plan based on these previous steps, posting it to the city's website, having a public information center to receive feedback, revising the plan to respond to feedback as appropriate, and making a presentation to Council. This is expected to occur in early summer and into the fall of this year. Not all HCD plans are identical. They do not look all the same. They are structured to respond to the specific conservation and change management goals of the place they apply to. They should also respond to the real and applicable land use planning policy context. As such, the Heritage Conservation District plan for Galt Core will be structured to ensure the heritage values and attributes of the district are maintained and celebrated as the area prepares for intensification as an urban growth center. The HCD plan will be structured to present policies and guidelines for 3 types of features. 1, contributing properties. 2nd, non-contributing properties. And thirdly, the public realm, such as parks, trails, bridges, and squares. The plan will also present implementation procedures for heritage permits, identifying what types of activities require one and what types of activities do not require a permit. It will also identify procedures for reviewing the HCD plan over time. In this particular case, it will also address the fact that there is a small HCD, the Main Street HCD, within the broader Galt Core HCD, and make some recommendations about how those two articulate together. And then finally, the plan will also address implementation related to integration of the HCD plan with other related land use planning studies, such as the height study, secondary plan, and zoning bylaw that would apply in Galt Core. I now want to do a quick refresh about the area's heritage significance and the specific features that express those values. Based on the detailed research, analysis, property surveys, and consultation conducted during the study phase, it was determined and concluded that the downtown retains a very good and well-preserved collection of street layouts, lotting patterns, buildings, streetscapes, views, open spaces, and landscape features. Together, they express Galt's significant period of commercial, civic, institutional, and industrial establishment, growth, and solidification on the east bank of the Grand River, starting in 1816 and culminating in the late 1930s, when the last major public building was constructed in the downtown and when Galt went off to war. The majority of buildings in the district date to between 1850 to 1920 and together function as an impressive collection of 19th and early 20th century features that express design, aesthetic, scenic, contextual, historical, and community values. One way of understanding the different but interconnected heritage qualities of the downtown is to look at the area in chunks. The northern entry to the district is marked by the Park Hill crossing over the Grand River and Mill Race Park. This location provides important views into the district and also serves as a visual edge, and the overall area functions as a gateway node into and out of the district. It contains remnants of the Turnbull Woolen Mill and now serves as important recreational space connected with the river. The district then transitions into its commercial core, marked by dense street walls of commercial blocks, mostly constructed in the mid to late 19th century, numerous landmark buildings, and the iconic Main Street Bridge with its aesthetic views across the river. Adjacent to the commercial core is a civic hub of architect-designed public squares and landmark buildings. Today, the area is known as and functions as Market Square and Civic Square, surrounding the historic City Hall. And even though the new City Hall was built here in 2008, it was a coming home. It was well integrated and responded to and complemented the functionality of these historical squares. The collection of buildings in this area includes Historic City Hall, Cambridge City Hall, Cambridge Fire Hall Museum and Education Center, formerly the Galt Fire Hall, and the Farmers Market Building. The Market Square and Civic Square provide public space connecting these various buildings and which represent some of the finest architect designed buildings in the study area, demonstrating Galt's civic and social role as a regional hub in the 19th and 20th centuries. Hugging the commercial core to the southeast is the Armory Precinct, aptly named for the Armory building that anchors this node and provides a strong visual eastern edge to the district. It serves as a transition area between the commercial to the north and the residential to the south. Flowing down from the commercial core and towards the water, we move into industry. Named the Galt Knitting Company Precinct, defined by a robust mixture of industrial buildings and sites, as well as workers' housing concentrated on Warnock Street. This area also includes the landmark home of the Cambridge Community Players. And finally, the district's southern edge is defined by the Water Street Riverside property frontages and linear corridor, providing a visual sense of entry into the district, as well as long-range scenic views. It also marks the reclaiming and revitalization of connections to the Grand, with the west side of Water Street functioning as the Levy Trail, acknowledging both the fortune and the disasters that have come from a town sitting on the banks of the Grand. It also includes Landreth Cottage. Within any one of these areas, there are contributing and non-contributing properties. Our method for identifying which properties are contributing versus non-contributing involves assessing whether the features on the property, be it buildings or landscape features, or nothing at all in some cases, have a sufficient level of material integrity and composition and date to the district's period of significance, 1816 to 1939. Here are visual examples of the types of properties and the differences between them that we're referring to. On the left, 10 Water Street North would be considered a contributing property built in 1890, architect designed. On the right, a non-contributing property on 95 Water Street, built circa 1975. Here is a draft map showing the distribution and location of contributing versus non-contributing properties. Contributing properties would be subject to conservation guidelines, while non-contributing properties, by their very definition, are expected to accommodate different levels of change in new development, and as a result would be subject to guidelines relating to infill in new development. The objectives for the Galt Core HCD plan have been developed based on the consultation activities during the study phase, our review of the proposed land use planning context, as well as the feedback we received from public, stakeholders, and council. A key objective of the plan is to reinforce and conserve the district's interconnected areas that feature significant built forms, streetscapes, materials, and character that reflect its historical, commercial, civic, institutional, and industrial associations and cultural heritage values. The second objective relates to celebrating and maintaining the physical, visual, and historical relationships associated with the Grand River in the district through development of guidelines for alterations, new development, and infill that address conservation of the area's heritage value, as well as its significant landmarks, views, and circulation routes. Another key objective of the plan is to develop consistent, sympathetic, and respectful design guidelines for new development and infill in the district, and to ensure that the HCD plan supports planned density targets in the downtown, urban growth center, and objectives of transit-oriented development related to the two planned major transit station areas. A key objective is to balance intensification and conservation goals so that the district retains its cultural heritage value while encouraging growth and animation of streets and spaces. Other objectives of the plan relate to implementing the district through a framework that encourages adoption of incentives and programs to support property owners, integrates a clear property standards bylaw process, and which promotes a streamlined and proactive heritage permitting process, aiming to ensure requirements are understood early in the process and delays and revisions to projects are avoided or reduced. Finally, the overall approach towards policy development in the HCD will be centered on three key principles. Policies should support conservation of the district's best and valued heritage qualities. Policies should be reflective of consultation with the public and stakeholders. Policies should build on existing policy frameworks and guidelines such as the Main Street and Downtown Urban Design Guidelines and integrate with the in-progress height study and secondary plan. And finally, the HCD plan policies should be responsive to the projected land use planning context in the downtown, specifically the introduction of increased densities in two major transit station areas. Oops. Thank you. That concludes my presentation for tonight.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So with that, I wanted to open the session for our question and answer period. We'll be breaking at around 6:55 to allow people for a quick break, coming back at 7. If you have any questions, you have two options. You can either raise your hand, and just pay patient with me. I need to scroll up and down to make sure that I capture all your hands. The other option is to also add your question to the chat function that you will find on your right bottom side of your screen. And so I will try to assign the questions as they come in to our different team members, and we will address all your questions. Okay, I see Bill Kennedy.
I think, sorry, this is and I was a few minutes late, so if you've already answered this, I apologize in advance. The slides, like the maps, are they going to be available after the meeting?
Yes, they will be available, and I will let Abe specify. It will be in our interface website, right?
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. I think I see Ali, then followed by Nadia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I tried to open my video and it's not working. I don't know for some reason. My question is to Rebecca. She said some of the building it's built from 1960 or 50 to 1920, but on my neighborhood, I think it's on the east side of Lincoln Avenue by McNaughton, the building, the houses are built like in 1965, 1950, 1945. I don't know why they put it on this map.
So, Ali, if I can just clarify the question, you're referring to the map that was showing properties in green.
Yes, yes.
So, I'll maybe just clarify what I stated in my presentation. So, the majority of the buildings in the recommended boundary date to 1850 to 1920. So that sort of 70 years of time. So many buildings date to that time period, but there are certainly a number of buildings that date to later periods, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And the process for identifying what may be considered a contributing property versus a non-contributing property relates in part to age, but also the level of integrity that the building has in terms of fabric. So for example, there might be a building from 1910, but it has been so incredibly altered and many additions now obscure what it originally looked like, and that might be considered a non-contributing building. So it's not a totally sort of binary process, but a property by property consideration informed by age as well as its composition and integrity. The specific properties, I think it's probably useful if you have specific properties that those can be identified to Abe, and we can provide some more specific comment on those with more time to look at those and review our information.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think, Ali, the area around Lincoln and McNaughton isn't actually proposed to be in the district boundary. It would be only west of Wellington Street.
Okay.
Thank you for clarification.
We'll go to Nadia, and then I will go to Vanessa, who also posted a question on the chat. Follow that with Dan. Nadia?
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much for all the work that everyone has done on this project. I have a process question. We're going to go to step 2, I think in the spring of 2022. Is that step 2 going to include the first consultation on the height study? Is that going to be like a joint public information meeting, or and the same thing I have about step 3, same question I have about step 3, which is the fall of 2022. Is that again going to include a joint meeting of some kind regarding the height study?
Yes, I can answer that. So the process that we've developed in terms of trying to coordinate those consultations, but also to make sure that each project really has enough time for people to speak to that project itself, is that we will try to coordinate the meetings at around the same time within, a week or two of one another, one in the spring and another in the summer. And so we would be holding meetings at the same time for the height study and for the Heritage Conservation District plan. And at those meetings, we will have representatives from each study available at the other studies meeting to allow for that conversation to happen and more information to be shared there. And then that information will be shared amongst the consultants as well to make sure that we're moving towards the same kind of goal. So that's the intention, is for the consultations to be held separately, but at the same time to allow for that cross-pollination to happen, but also not let one study get diminished by the other.
And then in regard to the intensification study, where is that study in this group of studies that concern the downtown core?
So the growth and intensification study is ongoing at this point. The consultants have been preparing work on secondary plans for other areas within Cambridge. The growth and intensification study for Galt Core is currently on hold, waiting for work to advance on the Heritage Conservation District Plan and on the Heights study, so that the research from those projects can be integrated into the growth and intensification study, which would ultimately produce the secondary plan.
And will there be, and I don't know if you'll ever do this, but will there be, I don't know if you'll do this, but it would be useful, at least from my point of view, to have a layout which is like the one that shows the contributing and non-contributing buildings, which has an overlay of the height study, so that you can see the degree to which there is an interaction between the contributing buildings and the height requirements for buildings in that area. Will anyone ever be doing that kind of work in order to generate something like that?
I think that's a good suggestion, but I can pass to the consultants to see, what their response would be.
Sure. So Nadia, that's part of our work in terms of developing the policy and guidelines to look at how what's being recommended in the Heights study intersects with what is the results of the Heritage Conservation District Plan. So that overlay is in progress internally on our side to see sort of the implications of the Heights study. What's working, what might be worth discussion or refinement in relation to the heritage results, and then that's something we'll bring back to staff and the broader staff team to provide direction on. How do we move forward on those points of those intersection points that need some further discussion and work.
Now, I have two other kinds of questions, and I'm not sure whether I should ask them at this point or whether they're to be in these breakout sessions. My first question is questions about the boundary on the east side and why it ended up the way it did. Sorry, not the east side, the west side. My apologies, the west side. And then the other question I have is the objectives are quite fine, but they're very general, almost amorphous. And for one of the things that I'm interested in is trying to get some sort of commitment that the materials being used for future construction in the downtown core reflect the historic nature of the materials that were used for construction during the period from 1850 to 1930. That is, I would prefer that we not have chrome and glass abound in the work that's done in the construction that occurs in the downtown core, and that this sympathetic nature or historic nature of materials be one of our objectives for changes to contributing buildings in the downtown core. And I'm not sure where that goes, but that's a very specific objective.
Yeah.
A little more.
I will suggest to really bring that back to our specific breakout session, think it's quite detailed, and we want to ensure that we note all the points that you're making, as well as to get into a little bit more hefty discussion on the on boundaries. So I would suggest to really bring that back to the session, and in the name of allowing others to also ask their questions, I will ask now Vanessa's question, which is quite interesting. She posted, Galt has an interesting situation given that there is already a Part 5 designation in the downtown core. Is this the only case in Ontario of a Part 4 within a Part 5 within a Part 4, I guess? And how are this anticipated to work together in terms of implementation? Also, are there any plans for updating the existing downtown Hcd in the future? Rebecca or Abe?
Yeah, I can address that. So at this point, the intention is that the existing Main Street Heritage Conservation District would stay designated under its current bylaw and regulated by its existing plan. However, at either through the plan process or at a future date, it may be possible to integrate the two plans together if it's determined that there is public support for that. But at this point, they would be two separate plans regulated by separate bylaws and separate, separate districts regulated by separate plans and bylaws. I'm not sure if it would be the only example of a Part 5 within a Part 5, but it could be.
Thank you.
I don't know, Rebecca, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you've covered the approach to implementation, and just that in discussion with representatives from the ministry, Heritage Sports, Tourism, and Culture Industries, they couldn't think of a comparable situation of a district within a district. So I think it is one of a kind that we're aware of.
Thank you, Rebecca. And now we have Dan Clements.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Yes, I just wanted to ask a question, make a comment about, I know there's the heritage element that's being discussed here, and there's also other meetings coming up about heights and so on. And it seems to me there's kind of an overlap there that'll probably become clearer in the future. But one of the comments that I heard, not today, but in a previous meeting that I was on, involved the combination of heritage and height, using this as sort of the bowl analogy, where what was being talked about was the downtown core with the heritage buildings would be the bottom of the bowl, and we wouldn't have a 35-story building on the corner of Main and Ainslie, that sort of thing. And but we have the Gaslight District, we have the condo buildings near the mill, we have a 37-story condo going up at the mill, sort of on the outer skirts of this bowl. And when I heard that analogy, it just made so much sense to me as a citizen that I hadn't thought about this approach about trying to have the bottom of the bowl where our heritage buildings are in the main downtown core, and then allowing developers and the just the needs of the community to evolve around the outside of that bowl in terms of the heights and so on. And really, does it matter if it's 20 or 30 stories? When it's on the outer skirts of the bowl, it can be more determined by the needs of the community and the obvious development opportunities that come up. So I'm just wondering where that might come up, and I want to just share with you that bowl analogy really stuck with me, and it's a great analogy for the public if that proves to be an analogy that makes sense for your future planning. It's a way to have citizens immediately understand this concept where we are protecting downtown, but we are enabling more aggressive development at the same time. So that's all I have for you.
That's a great question, Dan. It has certainly been part of our internal conversations here with the team. We understand, and we are prepared to build on the bowl strategy. providing maybe a little bit of more detail and layering, so you end up creating a bowl that doesn't end up being like a walling off of the downtown either. So I think there are certain subtleties within that bowl strategy that we are looking forward to input into, and really help our other teams to advance the height strategy and the intensification strategy that we need to deliver on based on provincial and municipal requirements. But I will let Rebecca or Abe to further comment on that.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So the bowl strategy was what was included in the draft plan or the draft guidelines for the heights study that are currently posted for review and that we will be undertaking consultation on. At this point, that is the first draft. And so we may end up having some revisions based on the consultation that happens.
Great, Abe. And I know there's another question on the chat that speaks to the visualization study, maybe perhaps being interactive.
Yeah. So Susan, as far as I understand, the intention is for the visualizations to be put together after the other studies have been completed. That's my understanding of how that's supposed to take place. So the visualization study would essentially take all of the information that's been received and put together models to suggest what the vision for the downtown core would look like if we implemented those policies.
Thank you, Ed.
Question?
Sure. And I cannot see yet.
Can I ask a question?
Of course. Yes.
Or make a comment?
Yes.
Okay. Let's suppose that council does accept the HCD. What impact, if any, would that have on heritage designated properties outside the zone?
Thank you, first. For Rebecca.
Can I just clarify, was the question if council does not accept?
If it does
Okay.
accept that,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm talking about heritage designated properties outside of that zone.
Mm-hmm. So there would be no change to existing properties that are protected under the Ontario Heritage Act outside that zone. The HCD plan is really boundary based. It only applies to the lands within the boundary and not lands outside of it. So there would be no change on existing designations outside, nor would it have implications for that.
Supplementary, if I may. So for properties within the HCD, would there be more monies available, say from heritage grants and things like that?
So I can speak to, as part of our work during the Hcd plan phase, we'll be identifying financial incentives used in other jurisdictions and make recommendations to, as part of our reporting to council and staff about what would be appropriate. And that goes back to my comment about the implementation portion of the plan will address recommendations for incentives to property owners. And I'll leave it to Abe to speak from the staff perspective.
So
Yeah.
One more supplemental, if I may, and that would be, if that's the case, is the city going to make more monies available for heritage properties and the upgrading of them and the renovations of those?
So I can speak to that. At this time, nothing is on the table in terms of making more monies available. I would say that it's something that may be considered moving forward, but we have not put together a proposal for increased grants at this point. However, the properties that would be designated as part of the district would then be eligible for the existing grants programs, which they're not currently eligible for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I see two other questions from Vanessa, but I wonder if we allow everybody to, take maybe a 3-minute break, come back by 7:05, and Vanessa, I think it would be important to kind of follow that conversation in your specific breakout room to address your questions. We can also take down. Thank you. I see your response. So, Greg, can we break for 3 minutes, no more, and then come back? So, welcome back. We'll now go into our smaller breakout room sessions. I wanted to take you through the overall intent of the sessions. We have a structure of sessions for about an hour conversation. The time goes extremely fast, and there is a lot of information that we want to discuss with you. Each breakout session will have a facilitator and order. Means a member of the consultant team as well as a city team. We'll come back for a plenary where you can select one of your breakout room participants as a representative to speak to the main topics and points that you discussed, or if nobody really feels like presenting tonight, our facilitator will take that on. So there will be 3 topics for discussions. One will be the review of the district's qualities through the discussion of character areas, as Rebecca already touched on, identifying during the study phase. The second discussion, which can be kind of part of the same discussion, I guess, will be discuss if there are any additional or other features in the character areas as they have been identified that should be considered as change is planned. And finally, the discussion will revolve around the types of changes and development that will fit in well in the different character areas. So we are starting to shape the policy and the guidelines that will address to the need and the pressure for change, while we preserve and maintain that character, that special character that it's characterizes downtown Galt. So those are the directives. So I will ask Greg to start assigning us to breakout rooms. If you have any issues and welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, I think we have everybody back. We have 30 participants. I see everybody here at the plenary. So welcome back. I hope you had a really interesting and busy session. I hope you were able to tackle all the questions that we forward. And so in advancing the session, I think I will start asking each breakout group to step forward and maybe allow the selected representative to present some of the main items and salient points that you discussed, or if there's no representative, to allow for either one of the co-hosts, facilitators to present. And just because I have as breakout room number 1, Rebecca, I don't know if you want to start. You're muted.
Sure. Thank you, Uta. So I am going to summarize the discussion that occurred, but I've encouraged and invited everyone that was in our breakout room to chime in where I don't touch on a key point that someone really wants to bring back to the plenary here. I'm still collecting my thoughts. We covered a lot of content. Uta, how much time would you like me to spend?
Well, I'm thinking about 4 to 5 minutes,
Okay.
no more. Thank you.
Okay. So I think what I'll do is run through each area and try to pull out some of the key things we talked about. So we started from the north and worked our way down, starting with Millrace Park, and some of the comments and elements that are really important and that development should respond to, or things that we didn't kind of have on our slides relate to a real sense, a great sense of invitation that Millrace Park provides, and thinking about policies for opportunities to maintain that programmable space, but also expanding it, particularly in consideration of what are the very two large parcels on the east side of Water Street and the redevelopment opportunities there, in terms of thinking about how you can sort of pull in what is very inviting green space on the west side of Water Street onto the east side when that opportunity presents itself. Millrace Park being an absolute jewel and anchor in that area, providing important views into and across the river. The whole idea of sort of events and animation being an important objective and also policy, but then also in thinking about new development, being very mindful of what makes complete and functional and livable communities, and the importance of amenities like grocery stores are incredibly essential as density grows in a downtown. We talked about in this area the residential area to the east and concerns about that area being excluded from the district boundary and the risk that those properties may face as a result. As part of this discussion, we also talked more generally about whether guidelines, policies and guidelines will be very tailored to each of these areas, or whether or not they will be sort of written on the district-wide level. So we talked about right now the approach is a district-wide approach where guidelines and policies aren't very, very prescriptive, but provide a framework for staff to guide sort of contextual solutions to applications for either changes to contributing buildings or infill and new development. And I think those capture some of the key points around the Millrace Park area. Moving to the commercial core. Views and vistas along Main Street, across the bridge as such a critical, important view to be absolutely protected, and those views going east and west along Main Street. A really good discussion about the area between Ainsley and Water, and a lot of original facades being buried, but there being sort of a rhythm of height and width that's a very interesting feature that relates to the heritage and the fabric that should be really kind of well understood and explicitly identified as something that development should respond to. East of Ainsley, talked about a lot of change has occurred there and things have been lost, and there might be various opportunities to sort of reintroduce in various areas there that sort of cadence of height and width that is dominant in some of the historical street walls. A remarkable ability to walk through blocks in this area, many of which are enhanced by other public art, or murals, or views of backs of buildings. And we honed in on the backside of the Main Street buildings along Imperial Lane here. And we came back to that in some other discussions, understanding how best to protect those views and the backsides of those Main Street buildings. Discussion around heights and access to sunlight and preservation of light along Main Street as a feature of sort of walkability. Wanting to see streetscapes and new development complement what's in the downtown, trees needing to survive. Moving into the civic cluster of buildings, talked about how the new city hall sets a really good example of how to do good new infill and provision of public open space as a kind of key idea to think about new development in a wide variety of places that can be programmed or just sort of flexible or kind of create these really interesting walkable features of new development. Going down into the Armory Precinct, we talked about this area really having kind of a bit of a breakdown of built form was one comment, and that this is a key area for intensification. It can accommodate a lot and in a way that could make some sense for the rest of the district. Paired with that, though, we had discussion about need for policies around interpretation and plaquing, so the level of change doesn't overshadow what has been there or what's occurred, or just to overall enhance the level of sort of understanding of that particular precinct, as well as other areas of the district. Also thinking about, even if this does become a largely intensified area, again, walkability, livability, policies directing provision of new park space. Discussion about, we talked a bit about the sort of stark contrast on Grosvenor Lane and the need to think about policies or approaches that would enable review of development adjacent to the district. And that overall, this is an area where height would be contemplated and expected, but that it would respectfully respond to the Armory and vantage points to the Armory. Quickly, I know I'm running out of time, Uta. The Galt Knitting Company Precinct talked about really a very special, unique flavor of features along Warnock Street and a sense of enclosure on Warnock, and these particular buildings being very vulnerable to demolition and policies needing to be very strongly written for these particular kinds of buildings. And then whether or not some buildings sort of at the edges of the district that might be outside could be recommended for Part 4 designations as part of the work being undertaken, or at a minimum documented as recommendations. And 6, the river edge, really kind of a number of comments about understanding, what is the development potential here, if any at all, given the functional trail uses, but also the berming, the floodplain regulations, and understand whether or not this has any potential for redevelopment given those features, getting a better understanding of how city-owned lands intersect with that particular area. A strong articulation that building up on the river edge would have a serious negative impact on views, walkability, and relationship to the river. So that's a really quick summary of the areas we went through, and then some general comments about new development. Some comments about not being afraid of height, but it needing to be done properly, needs to be contemporary of its time, and that the policies really need to address how to add density, recognition that intensification is needed, but it needs to be really selective about where taller buildings end up, and need to look carefully at the height and built form that stacks up to create that density, and a recognition that there are many different ways to achieve the density, and to do it in a way that maintains walkability, as well as the flexibility of design, And then linked to that also broader comments about other areas outside the core that can accommodate density in a way that is perhaps distributed differently than the urban growth center sort of currently contemplates. So the idea of kind of intensification spread across a larger area. Briefly discussion about incentives and addressing how they can apply to backsides of buildings. I think that captures some of the general comments.
There's a lot in that.
Yeah.
And obviously an hour will do that. But thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone that was in that session. It was an excellent conversation.
Great. Well, we'll go with Christina, followed by Laura, and then finally Nathan. In being cognizant of the time and whatnot, Christina and Laura and Nathan, if you could really highlight the most salient points. Trying not to repeat what Rebecca said, and Rebecca, I think, cover many aspects. We obviously will have summaries, but yes.
Yeah.
Looking forward.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of similar ground to Breakout Room 1. Some additional points that came up of discussion. We had important discussions around interpretation and making history known through plaques or museums or exhibits that if people are aware of the history, it's more likely to be protected. Some special areas within the district that we discussed were within the Galt Knitting Company, Mill Creek, that goes underground and has an outlet into the Grand River, which was once an open river, and how the Galt Knitting Company precinct has a distinct sort of feeling to it. You feel like you've entered a place when you get to that point. Within the Armory Precinct, we talked about the view from Ainsley Street to the old post office, as well as the rears of the buildings on the south side of Main Street being some people's favorite views. We also touched on the laneway that travels through the Main Street block on the north side to a rear parking lot. Within the commercial core, we touched on the building that's a newer building just to the south of the Carnegie Library at the end of Dixon Street, and how it was a good example of contemporary infill that responds to a street wall condition. We also touched on City Hall and New City Hall as an infill piece. Wesley United Church within the Civic Center block, and how the churches are a highlight of the downtown as a whole. And then within Millrace Park, also touched on how a grocery store is so critical to life within a downtown, and how special Millrace Park is. I went through that very quickly, so I hope I haven't missed anything from I'm sure I've missed things from our group. Well, we talked about sustainability was also an important piece of the conversation, and looking at deconstruction rather than demolition of buildings.
Thank you, Christina. And all your comments and chats and notes will be compiled into summary that will be available to everybody. So I trust everything will be captured there. But with that, we'll go to Laura.
So I will take over from Laura here, as we agree in our group. So just a couple things to add. We focused a lot in our group on well, I guess a couple things. So one is the more general character of the area, particularly the key views in and out of the district. So driving in from the north from Galt Collegiate Institute, seeing the railway overpass, the steeples were really important. The feeling of the downtown core being the center of business. The mix of historic and modern that is there right now. the European character, the river walk along the edge of the river were all identified as being important features. The authenticity of the district as well. Some issues that were identified were more regarding compatibility. So one was, how will views in and out of the district be protected, such as the views of church steeples if the churches themselves are not in the district. We had a really interesting conversation about parking specifically, and how parking could be approached creatively to be more attractive or more creatively integrated within the district. We also discussed questions of animating the downtown, but also improving infrastructure in the downtown to help animate it. You know, more like a European city. We spoke about heights, and in general, I think our group was pretty supportive of the bowl idea in terms of being very strict regarding heights, essentially along the downtown Main and Water Street corridors, but gradually stepping up towards the edges, being appropriate. That materiality was really important, that they would like to see similar materiality between structures in the same area and continuity between them, with historic materials like stone used and modern materials like glass and steel used very sparingly. I think those were really the key things that we discussed, on top of some of the ideas that have already been brought up. I don't know, Laura, if you wanted to add anything to that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Nathan.
Everyone. I'm going to keep it brief because a lot of what was discussed in the other rooms seem to have been also touched upon in our room as well. I guess going through the character areas, River Edge and the Mill Race Park, we kind of touched along similar things, including how important green space is within downtown areas, the interface of the trails and the parkways and that green space with the Grand River, and how that kind of looks. And then I guess in particular for Mill Race Park, looking at I guess what that space means in terms of being more active. I think there was a suggestion of including more music there and further activation here, which would be really important. I guess as well as maintaining those views along the Grand River. It was noted that the river is also a migratory bird route. So what new development might include is some guidelines that consider environmental impacts and bird-friendly design guidelines. Going into maybe the Galt Knitting Company, we spoke about the stone duplex that was across Warnock Street, opposite the Cambridge Arts Centre. Talked a lot about the solid stone and Scottish architecture that this area really shows, including some arched windows, brick and stone that are important. And we also touched on how lighting might enhance this character area, as well as some others. There was mention that some original style lighting is being implemented in other places of the city, and that might really enhance this area and maybe some of the others. In the commercial core area, kind of going through, everything has kind of been talked about by the other groups, but a consideration, I guess, for which existing structures are here, and really having reference and complementary styles to those is very important. There was a lot of discussion of the buildings along Ainsley Street. And then in the Civic Center, I believe the Scott building is one that came up that maybe some of the other groups I might not have heard. But there's a building next to that is a newer building that really complements the Scott building. So we really had a conversation about that and what that looks like in terms of new development and how that might fit in there. And then finally, I guess for the question number 3, the infill, piece, there was discussion about how materiality like red brick and stone, and other height restrictions and things like that can really complement the area. And maybe buildings looking more contemporary and not attempting to try to be a knockoff heritage building or a fake heritage building. There was discussion about the importance of that, as well as some active frontages too. So entrances, display windows, and those ground floors can really be used, I guess, as complementary to the streetscape. Other than that, I think the groups also touched on similar things in what we did too.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you all facilitators and note takers and for attending today. I think we will wrap up the session just short of 8:30. Our next steps, I will let Abe and I see Brad having a question.
I just wanted to say something. I only found out about this because I get Cambridge Today into my inbox, and that came to me late this afternoon. Otherwise, I would never have known about this meeting. I don't know how it was promoted. I don't know how it was, people were supposed to be made aware. I wanted to bring that up because if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have known.
Thank you.
If I may interject here, I agree with you, Brad. I don't think that there's enough publicity about what's happening downtown and what sort of input the residents can have. I would think that perhaps even a newspaper, because most people get the newspaper still, would be helpful. Also, I don't know what else. Something on Facebook, even more on Facebook, and I would share that, and as I shared this.
Thank you, Francis.
Me likewise. I would do, certainly, help to make other people aware if I'm made aware. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll let Abe and Rebecca to provide the closing remarks, next steps. Obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, all the material presented tonight will be available online on our studies webpage. And Rebecca or Abe, for their final remark.
Sorry, prompts happening through the WebEx. Abe, I can maybe just start off, and you can provide any further next steps. So from here, the immediate next steps, a recording of tonight's session will go up on the city's YouTube channel. I think it takes a couple days, and the materials presented tonight will be available on the project website. So to the comment about promotion and sharing information, please share that with other interested individuals about how to access information from tonight. We're also asking for any further questions or comments or feedback to be shared with Abe up until February 4th on the topics that we covered tonight, or otherwise generally any questions or comments you have about the project process. And then moving forward from there, we will be moving into the sort of policy and guideline development phase, and we're targeting March for our next sort of community public open session with a workshop more focused on specifics of policies and guidelines. So that would be promoted probably by the end of February, and we'll certainly ensure that we bring the feedback about promotion into that communication strategy. So those are the immediate next steps over the next sort of 8 weeks. Abe, anything further to add?
No, I would add to that if there are any suggestions for other places that would be helpful for us to be promoting, I'd appreciate those suggestions as well, because we certainly do want to reach as broad an audience as we can. And otherwise, I just appreciate everyone taking time to join us this evening. It was a long meeting, a lot of great ideas shared, and I really appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure meeting you or seeing you in any event.
I see. Brad, any further questions, Brad?
I just the what I wanted to say was, you have all our email addresses.
Yeah.
So maybe just to make sure that we are given the opportunity to join in the next meeting, could you send us a reminder?
Yep. Yeah. So, and anyone who was in this meeting will be on my email list. So I'll definitely send out that reminder. We are also advertising on the City of Cambridge social media. And we did send out a newspaper notice and notice to the owners. But if there are other areas, maybe groups that people might be interested in, whose members might be interested in the project or anything else, any other suggestions, I think we'd really appreciate that.
Okay.
I think a lot of people would be very interested in this if they knew about it.
Yeah.
So if you could please send out, I don't think it's a huge expense to the city, please send out letters to residents within a 5-block area of downtown Cambridge where this is being done. That would be very helpful. And I think including people that are in on Aberdeen, on Oak Street, on McNaughton, on Lincoln, all of these areas would be very helpful, and people will be able to give you their input and make it more helpful for you to make a decision.
And so we'll take your offer, Brad, to promote in Facebook too, if possible. Thank you. Thank you, Maura.